Saturday, September 12th, 2020, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So yes, I got a bit of a cold. I feel a bit under the weather. Is it COVID? Am I going to get tested? No way. And that plays into the cycles, right? And yesterday or the day before, I started looking into something for some reason to do with currencies, as I usually do. And I think I stumbled upon a 100-year currency cycle. So that's what I want to talk about today. Before I do that, on a personal basis and my cold that I have today, I moved to London back in 1992. At the beginning of September, I left Geneva and I was offered a job in London, so I came to work in London, in the city. So I started the Monday after the bank holiday or the Tuesday after the bank holiday. And a couple of weeks later, one of the guys on my desk at work, he was Japanese. He used to organize singles parties every month for the people on the desk that were single. And I remember vividly because that's how I met my wife. He said, Mario, we're going to have a party this week. Can you come? And I said, yeah, I'd like to come. And then the day of the party after work, I felt really rough, like I feel right now, a cold. But I decided to go, and that's where I met my wife. So that's the story. That's the cycle. So we're back at around the same time, second to third week of September. And I've got the same kind of cold, head cold, feel a bit lethargic. It's all to do with cycles, right? And even the Bible talks about it, of course, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. So I'll go through that for those who think things always change and that future generations or our generations know best. So let's read from chapter 1, verse 9. It says, the thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there's no new thing under the sun. So there you go. It's just cycles, in my opinion. And the other thing that happened in 1992, in September, that was very interesting, was the British pound falling out of the European rate mechanism. That was a fixed exchange rate mechanism, the ETHEREUM, that was trying to set up all the different European currencies for the future euro. So the pound collapsed in September of 1992 as well. So there's another cycle there, currency cycle. George Soros, of course, became famous for breaking the Bank of England and making $1 billion or so.
If you would like to support the channel, please visit the Teespring store, where you can find Billy merchandise and other products. You can also donate via PayPal or Patreon.
The cycle I found, though, looking at things the last few days, is what I think is a 100-year cycle. And it's to do, of course, with the monetary system of the UK. And you might say, well, we've got the dollar right now. It doesn't apply. Well, but don't forget, the British pound was the major reserve currency up until World War I. And it was definitely a major reserve currency up until, I would say, the outbreak of World War II. And I also recommend you watch a video called The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire. It just goes to show how important still the city of London is. And of course, the first event here, or the first cycle that I found, is around the early 1600s. So the United States didn't even exist as it does today. Let's go through this 100-year currency cycle that I think I found. You might have another opinion, but it seems to happen every 100 years. So in 1600, the East India Company was founded, and eventually imports from India led to the drain of precious metals from England to India. A little bit like the trade deficit that the US has now with China and the rest of the world, right? Since since the collapse of Bretton Woods. What's that got to do with a currency cycle? Well, in 1621, which is about 400 years ago, they had to pass the Act Against Usury in the UK or in England. The UK wasn't around back in 1620. And it set the maximum legal rate of interest in England to 8% per annum. So I thought those two were interesting because you were seeing the drain of precious metals, gold and silver coinage to Asia, starting in 1600 when the East India Company was formed. And then you see that they had to pass this Act Against Usury. I think there's a shortage of specie or coin, and that's why they had to do it, because people had to borrow money. So I think that was what triggered this 100-year cycle, the founding of the East India Company. It was by royal charter, of course. They had a monopoly, and they became, of course, a very powerful company, which was disbanded, I think, in 1853. So now we go forward about 100 years to 1717, which is when Isaac Newton, who was the master of the Royal Mint, established a new mint ratio between silver and gold that had the effect of driving silver out of circulation and putting Britain on a gold standard. And the precursor to the gold sovereign, the guinea, was pegged at 21 shillings. 1720 as well, of course, was when we had the South Sea bubble, as well, the South Sea Company. So there's that year again, 20, right? 1717 to 1720. And we are 300 years, of course, from that bubble. Nowadays, of course, we have the NASDAQ bubble. So what happened 100 years later? Well, a couple of things, actually, and it started out in 1816. You had the Coin Act of 1816. And I quote here, and it's from this book here that I have about the sovereign. I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to get the book. And it says, the act was implemented by an order in council of 3rd of August 1816, which ordained that the gold coins were to consist of sovereigns of 20 shillings and half sovereigns of 10 shillings. The weight of the sovereign was fixed at 123.274 grains, or 20/21 of weight of the guinea, the finest remaining at 22 carat or 0.9166. So yeah, the sovereign still that fixed amount of weight. It's about 8 grams, I think, 123.274 grains, which is around 0.2345 of a troy ounce. So what happened in 1821 that was so important? Well, I think they were setting the stage for 1821 when they reset the coin, the sovereign. They brought the sovereign and they replaced the guineas, right? And it was because of the Bank Restriction Act of 1797. That was an act of Parliament which removed the requirement for the Bank of England to convert banknotes into gold. The period lasted until 1821, when convertibility was restored. The period between these two dates is known as the restriction period. That's according to Wikipedia. So there you go. The coins were ready, and Britain was back on the gold standard after the restriction period. And in my opinion, this ushered in a century of relative peace and industrialization with no inflation. How do I know there was no inflation during that period? Well, because you can look up in the Bank of England inflation calculator, as you can see here. There was minus 0.1 deflation per annum from 1821 to 1914, and now we come to 1914 to 1920 period, and you will see why I've got those two dates. Well, 1914, of course, most of you will know gold convertibility was suspended after the outbreak of the war. We call it now World War One. Back then, they didn't know what it was going to be. It eventually became the Great War. And yeah, they did restore the gold standard in England or in the UK from 1926 to 1931, but it wasn't a classical gold standard, and it wasn't successful. And what happened in 1920, just after the war? Well, in 1920, silver coinage, UK silver coinage, was debased from the 0.925 sterling silver standard to 0.5. So there was a debasement of 50% of the money. And in my opinion, this ushered in a century of major wars and inflation. And the Bank of England inflation calculator doesn't lie, as you can see here, right? So what are we going to get, in my opinion, in 2020 and 2021? Well, as you can see here, there's a coin from the Royal Mint. They're supposed to be celebrating 200 years of the gold standard. I think it's more of the sovereign standard, because the gold standard really started out in 1717 with Isaac Newton. Is the Royal Mint giving people a hint? Because as you can see, the coin here says 2020 gold standard. I know it's the anniversary, they say, of the 200th anniversary. We'll say, well, that's the 200th anniversary of the sovereign as we know it, right? But who knows what's going to come out of what's happening. Right now, of course, 2020, you could say, is an epic year. If you compare it to 1914 or 1820 as well, when the Napoleonic Wars had ended, or even 1717. I don't know how history will see 2020 as exactly, and I don't think things are over. So that's why I think there is a 100-year currency cycle. I'm not sure exactly what it will mean in the future, but looking at cycles, we see that things repeat themselves. Right now, it might be thinking that we'll never have a period of peace and low inflation, because that's what we've had for the last 100 years. So what I actually think is probably quite encouraging for future generations, like for my daughter and maybe my grandchildren in the future, or your family in the future, that the next 100 years will be more stable, more peaceful, more prosperous. But right now, of course, we're going through the changeover, I think, and that's why it feels really biblical, as some people are calling it, right? So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms below here. So I wish you all a great weekend. Take care. Bye.